How's it going, guys? Welcome to another Soul Encoded video. Today we're going to be going back into our foundation series and we'll be adding HTML to our toolkit. So let's talk about that. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It's basically the skeleton of your website. So there's a few terminologies that you need to understand when we're talking about HTML, such as tags, elements, attributes, and the DOM, for example. So let's kind of start with the DOM. What is the DOM? The DOM is basically it stands for Document Object Model, and is created by your browser like Chrome, Safari, or Firefox. The DOM is created by your HTML markup. So the browser will parse through your HTML markup and then we'll create this tree structure, which is the document object model. We'll get more into that in another video, but just understand that that's essentially what is being created and what HTML is used to create. So what is involved in HTML? So HTML has tags, which are basically the keywords that you use to define different types of DOM objects. So for example, you could have divs, which are like containers. You could have paragraph tags, which are a way to say, hey, there's a paragraph that needs to go in here. And that's kind of how you create the skeleton, that you use tags. And then inside the tags, you could have attributes, which are just kind of more information and functionality you could add into your tags. Such as an image tag, you need to put a source. So you could put a source attribute, and that source could be like a URL link or some relative path into your code base. So the other thing is elements. So when you combine tags and attributes together and the contents inside the two tags, that creates one element, and that element becomes one element inside of the DOM. Lots of things very quickly, but it all makes sense to you once I start programming. A lot of people will say that HTML is not a coding language or some sort, but you know, it really is. Don't let anyone tell you that whatever programming language it may be, no matter how simple it is, you should give it the respect that it deserves. You know, a lot of people spend a lot of time making HTML, and HTML is used for almost every website you see out there. Just think about that like simple thing, and then you should give HTML the respect it deserves. Learn it well and be proud that you know how to use this tool. So just a side bit for all the haters out there, but yeah. Let's continue on. Enough introductions, and let's just dive right into building our first little website. So let's go through some of these basic tags. Let's create sorry, that was really quick. I just have a snippet for HTML, but basically this part right here, this is the doc type. This defines that this is a HTML document, and you need the HTML tag to say that this particular file, this document that you're passing in, is a HTML. So this is the very top element that you're going to be creating. The head tag right here is basically additional information about your website. So for example, in the title tag, I could say my first website. So, and then when we refresh this page, you can see right up here at the very top, I don't know if you guys can see, but right there it says my first website. So the title just adds it to that little tab bar, but it does other things too. So the head tag is very important for SEO optimization, and SEO stands for search engine optimization, which you guys should probably all know, but it's basically, you know, for Google to help you rank. So there's like meta tags that you could set. There's other things you could put in here, and I'm not going to go through everything, but just understand that the head tag is for search engine optimization and linking your files and adding your script tags and style tags and things like that. And we'll be doing that. So let's continue on. So the body tag is essentially where all of your content will live. Everything that the user sees, basically the body tag is where it's going to go. So let's create like a div here. So what I like to do is I like to think in divs. So that's something that you guys should get very used to. When you see like a website, try to like break it down into divs, and then like how you would organize the skeleton based on what you see, because once you start seeing websites in like bunch of little divs and paragraph tags and header tags, you'll see it differently and you'll get a sense of how to start building this out. So let's create a div, and then let's just put a header tag in there, h1. Now the header tag goes from h1 to h6, h1 being the largest and h6 being the smallest, but all the header tag is just saying, hey, this is where I could put a text that will be described as a header, essentially, so like a larger version of a tag. So you could say my very first website, and then when we refresh this page, you'll get right here my very first website. So that's pretty good, right? So we'll continue on. Let's just create another div here, like so, and then let's create a paragraph tag. Hello, my name is John. And this is what a paragraph tag looks like. It's just a much smaller version of the header tag, and the paragraph tag is kind of where you would put all of your copy, essentially. Most of your copy will live in your paragraph tags. So here I want to briefly talk about a few things. In HTML, there are tags that create new lines, and there are tags that does not create new lines. So for example, if I made another little paragraph tag inside of this paragraph tag, and we refreshed it, you'll notice that this hello my, and then this name, and then this John is all separated in new lines. And that's because the paragraph tag creates a new line at the end of it. But there is something called the span, which is the span tag does not create a new line. So let's take a look, and as you can see, it's back to how it was originally, but because you're inside a span, you could add class a selector here, like hello, and I'll go into selectors later, but basically you could select it based on this class that you created and then change just that name. So that's something you can do. You could also bold words like so. And as you can see, it was bolded. And bold, the thing about bold is there's also strong, which is the same thing. So you'll notice that sometimes in HTML there's things that seems like it does the same things, and it's true, it does. And most of that has to do with the fact that there's a lot of different browsers out there. And over time, things had to be added to support all the different browsers and things like that. And so a lot of things are legacy related, and that's why it could get really confusing, because when you're starting to learn, if you look at the exhaustive list of all the HTML tags, all the attributes, you'll be like, what do I need to learn? And that's kind of the reason why I'm creating this. I'm just showing you bare minimum you guys need to understand so you guys could start making your very first websites. So just like the bold, there's other stylizing tags you could do, such as the italics tag, which is basically italicizes your name. Let me bump this up a little bit. There's also emphasize, which is EM, which is very similar. I think for most browsers it's the same. Yes, it is. And there's also strike through, which is strike, and then this puts a line in your name. So those are a few things that you can do for text, so altering the text. And notice that you could probably do most of these things in through CSS as well, but it's just you could do it straight through your markup as well. And that's kind of a common thing that you'll realize. Now let's move on. So next thing, let's move on to the image tag. So let's say you want to add an image. The image tag is right here is a self-closing tag. You could use a self-closing tag. You don't have to. Now, the image tag needs a source attribute, and I could go over what attributes are, but basically the attributes are just a way to add more information and detail to your tags. But some tags just straight up needs it for it to actually be functional. For example, if you did this, it will still work, but you won't see anything. But if you go into the console right here, you'll see that the image tag actually is created. right there. I don't know if you guys can see, but basically the element is created, but because there's no source, nothing is displayed. So let me quickly find some random image. So I just grabbed a quick image from my LinkedIn profile, and there it is. Wow, it's a really big face over there. Let me do something real quick. Has a really big face. Let me just inline style this real quick. So okay, so this width is just another attribute. You could do this with a style. You could style it using CSS as well, but you could just use an attribute. I'm just saying the width should be 100, so it's also scaling down the height as well. So moving on, let's actually make this little guy an anchor tag. So an anchor tag basically is how you do links. So you would do something like that, like so. But because we want to make this image a link, let's do that. And then for anchor tags, you need to do an href. Href is, I think, hypertext reference, I think, something like that. But it's basically you just have to pass in a URL. I just grabbed my LinkedIn user ID, user website URL, whatever, and now when I refresh, if I hover over this and click it, it will actually take me to my LinkedIn page. So I'm gonna stop that real quick and then go back. Cool. So we just made a link, and you could basically wrap this anchor tag over any element, and then that element, so basically what's inside of this anchor tag becomes the link. So that's how you do anchor tags with links. So down here, let's create another little div like so. Let's move on to lists. So you could do order lists, which is basically it'll have numbers associated with the list. So you use this when basically you're saying that this particular list has to be in order. So first item, second item, like so. And then you'll see that it's 1 and 2. And then let's go ahead and do the same thing, but use unordered lists, like so. And you'll see that it will just be like little bullet points. Now let's go in and move on to form elements. So for form elements, it's a little different. Basically, you need to say, okay, I'm going to encapsulate everything in here as a form, and everything inside of the form is considered to be a form, is part of the form. And there's a few things that makes up a form. For example, there's a tag called labels, which are basically, when you see a form, you'll see like email, for example. Then you'll see like the left-hand side will be email, and then the right-hand side will be an input, right? So to do that, you say email, and then you could say something like input, and then you could say, you could give it an attribute name, and you could say email, for example. So when you do that, you create this form that's kind of tied together. You could also have different types of inputs, like you could have a bunch of options, and then you could have like selectors, select, and anything inside the any options inside the select tag will be defined as essentially one of the inputs, one of the options that you could select. So you could say option 1, 2, and 3. And like so. So that's how you make drop down select options. And then you could also do input, and then you could say type equals submit, and this will create a button essentially. And when you hit the submit button right here, it actually makes a request to the back end. Now I haven't defined what that is because you have to put in like action here, and like add the backend URL essentially, but I'm gonna say that for another video because that's a whole another subject in itself, and we have to discuss REST in more detail. And if you guys haven't seen my video on REST, my simple explanation, I will link it below. But yeah, so that's how you make forms. Now there's tables, but I'm not really going to go over tables because we don't really use it that much anymore, and I'm trying to keep this video a little bit shorter, but I'll link another video that does tables really well because we still use it in emails quite a bit, but normally we don't use it that much anymore. Now the final bit of this particular very quick rundown of HTML, I'm just going to change some of these divs into some of the HTML5 tags essentially. So for example, let's say that this is the header tag, like so, and notice it doesn't really change anything, right? Also, let's just say this, let's just change this guy to, let's just change this guy to section. Let's just change this guy. Let's add a big, let's also change this guy to main. And then let's just change this guy to footer. But basically it's just another way of writing divs essentially. It doesn't really change how your skeleton will look. These HTML5 tags are mostly the same. But yeah, I'll probably do like a vlog type video on HTML5 and like kind of do a little bit of a deeper dive. I just wanted to briefly show you guys what they are. Now finally we'll go over a few attributes for these. One thing to note about attributes is that there's a lot of attributes, but not all attributes can be injected into these tags. For example, the source tag is kind of unique to image tags. There's a few other tags that may need it. Same with like the href, it's unique to the anchor tag. So, but here are kind of the general ones that are pretty useful. So for image tags, you could have an alt, which is just like, it's some text that represents the represents the image. So for example, this is an image of me, so I could say John's face. The most important two attributes I will say are classes and IDs. Some may never use IDs. It's like a whole thing in programming websites. Like people don't like using IDs for some reason. I think they have their purpose. If it's really like a unique, it's guaranteed to be a unique thing, then you can use IDs. But most people are on the opinion, I would say, that you should use classes for everything. So what is a class and an ID? It's just a selector. So later on, when you're trying to target a certain DOM element using JavaScript or CSS, you need some way to select it. And a class, for example, list items container or something like that, this name right here can now be selected. So if we add a style tag like so in the style tag I could say list.items.container. I'm gonna go over CSS later in probably the next video, but right here when you put dot, it means class. When you want to select an ID, you do hashtag. But so we do here, and then background color, we could say green. And boom, we have selected that class, and then we have affected the styling to it. So the main difference between style and class is that classes are essentially reusable. So we could add class item to the main, and boom, our main is now green as well. But IDs, it has to be only one element. Only one element gets to have the ID. So those two are probably the most important attributes. There's tons of other ones, so go ahead and look through them and try to kind of get used to using certain attributes with others. Brief note on commenting out your markup. So you just use you basically need this left arrow with the exclamation mark and then the right arrow to comment it out. And then when you do that, it disappears essentially. So that's super quick. But yeah, that's essentially HTML in a nutshell. There is other things in the challenge. You're gonna have to use a link tag here to link to an external style sheet. So try to look up how to do that. And I'm going to provide the style sheet so you guys can just link it, because I haven't gone over CSS yet. But yeah, that's essentially this particular HTML markup. I've gone through pretty much, I would say I've gone through majority of the tags that you'll use. Like 80% of the time that you're, like 90% of the tag, you'll probably just be using these tags. There's other tags out there that are used quite frequently, but I think this just covers the bare minimum that you need to get started to build websites. Try not to think really complicated about the things that you're learning, you know. Take it one step at a time. If you're a beginner, learn the most effective things that you need to start building things. Because once you start building, that's when all of this stuff will start being internalized. And once that becomes internalized, you can move on to the next step. And then you internalize another bit and another bit. And then like a year down the line, if you keep at it, you'll realize that you have gained a vast amount of knowledge. And you'll wonder, like, when did I learn all of this stuff? But you're not going to get there if you don't practice it. Because practicing all this stuff is probably the number one thing. You could read it, you could watch me do these videos, but you need to go and practice it. Even HTML, if you don't write it for like a year, you'll probably forget a lot of little things. So like I said, give HTML the respect it deserves. You know, treat it like a real language of sorts. Master it, lock it up in your tool set, and then just, you know, continue to kick ass. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. The challenge is basically making something like this, but adding, making it a little bit more pretty. It's essentially your very first website. So, but yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and enjoy me on the next one. Bye.